We live in a fast-paced and hectic world where it's easy to feel overwhelmed, stressed, and out of control. How do you manage all the competing pressures without losing sense of yourself? How do you stay focused enough to not only plot a path, but follow it? Welcome to Master Your Life, a show that offers inspiration, insight, and intelligence, as well as success stories from many walks of life that can show you how you can control your own destiny. Our knowledgeable and entertaining host and her guests give practical advice that you can use every day in the quest to master your life. Now, here's your host, Leaha Mattinson.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's show. I'm so excited to have each and every one of you tuning in from wherever it is that you are on this wonderful planet. I'm host Leaha Mattinson, and it's my absolute divine pleasure to welcome to our stage Mitchell Rabin. Mitchell, how are you today?
I'm well, thanks, Leah. Good to see you.
Now, Mitchell, if you're only listening to this as a podcast, you're going to think that he is like a spring chicken because, he's youthful and got lots of zest and zip and vigor. If you're watching this on video, you're going to see that he also has those things, but he also has some years of experience. So it's really important to tune into this Master Your Life podcast, especially now, because Mitchell's heart has been in creating a better world. For not just the last 5 years, but for the last 30 years. So Mitchell, it's my, again, absolute divine privilege to have you here speaking to our audience. So Mitchell, how did you get started? Tell us about you. There's lots and lots on your CV.
Yes. Well, first of all, I like to tell people that even though I've been doing this for some 30 or so years, I actually started when I was about 10. So,
there you go.
So that clears the slate, of any miscomprehension.
Totally hilarious. Yeah, me too.
Yes, I know. I remember you back then.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
So to answer your question, I really did begin a long time ago. I mean, honestly, I always had this idea that my life was about service. It wasn't really about me as such. And in some ways, Leah, I think of biomimetic analogies, such as the queen bee has worker bees working for her, and they have a sense of purpose that is directed and clear, and they do their thing, and they serve the higher level, if you will. And in a way, even though I have found that my own life is actually in itself quite interesting, it's really about serving a higher purpose, a higher intelligence. And so that is the way I've always sort of defined what I do. So it would be no surprise, really, that later on in life, I would start an organization and a TV and a radio show called A Better World. I was always sort of looking outside myself at what needs to take place here. What solutions would help to bring about a better life for all beings, or as we say in Buddhist psychology and parlance, all sentient beings. So no one is excluded.
Oh, things are not that bad, Mitchell. Come on. What do you mean a better world? Why do we need a better world? Who is this guy? What in the world is he talking about?
What fantasy is he living in? God knows, Really.
It's not just for the sci-fi films, so I'm loving the analogy of the queen bee because recently I was watching some film that was sort of the way that the royalty was actually known is that the bees were under her command. So very interesting, just this juxtaposition of things. But yeah, so what do you mean we need a better world? What's happened in your experience that could use improvement? What do you think?
How about everything?
Oh, everything. Yes.
There is an irony, though, that you're sort of pointing a finger to, interestingly, because my own life is actually very kind of blessed in that I wake up in a beautiful place in the middle of New York City. I'm surrounded by trees and flowers and plants. I go to the river. I do Qigong, looking at the sunrise. I myself feel like I've been given so many blessings. And yet, when I step outside onto, let's say, the street, I go, oh my God, there are people that are sleeping in boxes. There are people who don't have enough food to eat right here, right outside, several minutes, I should say, from my door. And that is just a signal and an indication and a symptom, if you will, of a world that's actually in tremendous distress.
Yes.
And it has to do with systems from the top all the way to the bottom, where things don't work. Attitudes are not correct about taking care of our brothers and sisters. And, wealth is concentrated at the top, and everyone else, well, devil may care, if you will. And I don't think I have to elaborate on that. I think everybody knows in their hearts and minds that this is the structure. And it's sad because it doesn't have to be this way, because I look at the world, I see this incredibly gorgeous earth with all the trees and the plants and the flowers and the birds and everything else. And I say, this is something to celebrate. This is something to embrace literally every day and to live in a state of gratitude. However, if we don't create this among all of us, it ain't going to go down that way. It's going to be fragmented, where some are benefiting and others are not, or it's at the expense of others. And I guess as creators, I just don't feel it has to be that way. So honestly, when I was around in my teens, I grew up somewhat during the Vietnam era, Leah, and I saw adults seeking to solve world problems, serious problems, by bombing and killing and murdering and warring. And I went, you're kidding. I mean, I'm a kid. It's one thing for me to get into a little scuttle with a friend or a foe, in my bracket. But for adults who I imagine were rational, mature, and the like, they're bombing each other's brains out. Something is wrong with this picture. So actually, I began thinking that maybe I would become a lawyer or go into politics and change legislation and all that. But when I stepped back a little further and I looked more largely from an elevated point of view, I said, this is not a problem of legislation. This is a problem of the human heart and mind. It's an issue of consciousness. And if that isn't aligned, it doesn't matter who is in office. It doesn't matter who the captains of industry are, if they're incoherent and unconscious and not vibing, if you will, to the right level. You know what I mean? And so I set out on a path of psychology, actually. I thought that that would be the vehicle that I could follow. And indeed, I followed it, and I continue to follow it as a therapist, as a coach, as a counselor, as a stress management consultant. And because of my predilection toward wisdom of the East, and you and I have talked about this, in China, in India, in Tibet, I loved working also with the body, not just the heart and the mind. Well, they're both part of the body too, but I wanted a more integrated perspective. So I studied Tai Chi Chuan and Qigong, and that led to Chinese energetics and Chinese traditional acupuncture. So I brought those things together.
Yeah, so it's kind of like psychology redefined. Because I think when people think about, when I think about psychology from 30 years ago, when I was starting my practice in 1991, I'm like, holy, that psychology actually went the way very much of, let's look at how we can cut the person into parts and then, fix each of the parts. So the biomechanical, behavioral restructuring of people, and not the sentient, knowing of that you're bioenergetic. And so that's what I loved about when I first read what you were doing. I thought you're one of the very few psychologists that I've met in my time that's fully embraced maybe both sides, right? Of going, there's a time and a place for all things.
Correct.
And that's the virtue of openness, of learning, and doing what it feels good authentically in your natural state of being, without interference of, medications and that kind of thing. So again, back to your story, you've got a very powerful.
No, I appreciate your words, and it's nice to hear, because I have felt like I used the analogy of the bee before. Well, now I'll use the analogy of the fish, of a salmon swimming upstream.
Sure.
And as
Yes.
a Canadian, you'll appreciate that even more than most Americans.
Yes.
But
I do.
indeed, I've always felt like I'm going against the river. And yes, I have my colleagues that think similarly. But to hear you from an objective point of view, we met relatively recently.
We did.
For you to see that in my curriculum vitae, my resume, so to speak, and pick up on that is delightful for me to hear. So
wonderful.
Yeah. So in short, Leaha, I went to working with people's integrated mind and body, dealing with the relationship between emotions and, in the five phase theory, so to speak, and different organs, and working with the organs and the meridians to try to balance out things like anger and fear and joy and the like. So I get people who are balanced and rational and centered and playful and loving and compassionate and in their body. That's another whole thing, if you know what I mean.
Right.
So
yes, I do. And I think this is a good thing to talk about what that looks like, because there's a lot of people who are, purporting to be quote unquote spiritual beings, and their physical body is in terrible shape. And so the integration of being a spiritual, not even being a spiritual being, we're spiritual, we are spirit.
Yes, that's
and
right.
like the closing down of that is what we've perfected, it seems, as a species, is how much can we dampen that little glowing ember that came here, right? It's like when you look at babies, they're little glowing embers of delight and love and awesomeness and reverence and certainty too. Like they're certain that things are going to be okay for them. And then we have experiences throughout our life that we allow to
that down.
Yeah, shut it down. And so that the balanced, centered heart, open mind, clear conscience is quite it's quite a thing to see the values living out virtuously, the values lived out, and how much that can expand your life. Your lifespan, your joy in life, your experience of life, the opportunities that come to you. So talk more about those things that have happened, because you've had quite a few very neat opportunities too.
Yes, I would say so. I would like to make reference to the way a better world sort of developed, because it's out of that space you were just describing of working with people. And well, look, I'm a Taurus. We're the first, earth sign in the zodiac. We tend to be grounded in a way, given by nature, if you will, although not all Tauruses are that way. But I've had that as a kind of as a value in my life, having studied Tai Chi from an early age, basically teenagehood. And so I always had that idea that the ancient Chinese have embedded literally in their bodies and their genetics. So I've always valued that. But what I found was working with people, individual counseling, couples counseling, some family counseling, was that was a slow way to actually affect the change that I felt I wanted to see on the planet. And it was going to take a long time. And it happened that I had a healing center, a stress management center in New York City called the Center for Creative Well-Being, going back many, many years. And I was getting interviewed because I had flotation tanks. I had a dry flotation tank called a sound womb. I had some pretty innovative stuff, plus the acupuncture very early on and the counseling. And people going, wow, this is cool.
Right.
And I was getting interviewed, and a gentleman came along who's a kind of a well-known radio personality, nutritionist, activist, Gary Null, and he saw what I was doing and he went, "This is fantastic." And so he started interviewing me, and I started getting interviewed for a lot of local radio and TV in New York City. And I went, media? This is cool. This is a way of reaching so many people in that same booked hour where I would be sitting with one or two people, you know, an individual or a couple usually, and which is fantastic. But now I'm reaching hundreds and thousands of people in that same hour.
Yes.
I said, this is stepping up the game. So in 1993, I started something called A Better World Community Public Access TV in Manhattan.
Right.
And I've been doing it ever since, every week.
Right. So nearly 30 years. That's just incredible. It's absolutely incredible to me, because I think the technology has changed so much, Mitchell. You know, we talk about the marvel of the technology now, and we were laughing because right when we got on this podcast, guys, we had this power surge. It was just like, my computer shut down. It's like scrambling around. So even now with all this wonderful technology, there's glitches in the cosmic flow. But when you're given a mic, there's something that happens that you can use that mic for good and for elevating, or you can use it for BS. And so the uprising or uplifting of humanity is the other thing that you've just so consistently done. I do think that deserves a pat on the back, because that longevity is what, and the longevity of your health and well-being is something else that people can get inspiration from. You know, you're one of the few, again, it's like the mentors of going, now here's somebody who's actually walked his talk. You know, you're in good physical shape. You've got a smile on your face. You're living in the challenges of the modern day world. It's not like you've had it, things have been easy all the time. And yet here you are. You know, you roll out of bed, a smile on your face, not just for yourself, but for the people who you're interacting with, and you let things roll off your back. Things are a laugh. It's like there's a joy and a happiness in the funny stuff, the curveballs that are thrown at us. So again, yes, I just want to say thank you for that. And for people who are just listening to this as a podcast, I want to encourage you to come to masteryourlife.ca and watch the interview, because I think this is the where people need to see that their coaches, their mentors, their teachers, their instructors are actually looking as if they are practicing what they are teaching. And so that is just key to this, the virtue of walking your talk for this better world. So back to your story, you've been doing this 28 years. I'm not even hardly that old. Hang on. Let me check my rings, my tree rings.
Are we looking at the solar year, or are we looking at the lunar year?
Sure. Is this my past life or is this my present life?
You know, I started off this program, Leah, as a bee, and then it became a salmon, and now I'm becoming a duck. Just based on what you last said, I let water roll off the duck's back, you know?
I do.
And indeed, I think that is really important. It relates to the old Buddhist and Taoist idea of non-attachment, if you will.
Right.
You know, and Vedic, you know, where we are involved but not attached. And it's a practice. It's a spiritual, psychological practice. And it's not easy. And we all get, fumble with that one. But to a large extent, I do gratitude practices in the morning. Very, very, very simple while doing the Qigong. And it sort of sets an attitude for the day. And, it's a practice.
It is very.
It doesn't really happen like, if I don't feel this way organically, therefore something's wrong. No, impose it. Do it until you master it. Well, you're the one who speaks about mastering life. And so practice until it becomes real. Fake it until you make it, so to speak. What you're actually doing is you're retraining your neural network to abide by being who it is you want to be. Joe Dispenza is someone who has helped to teach me that I've interviewed him several times over the years, and we were friendly. And he really, I think, has a very good perspective on our being sort of raw material, and we get to shape it and mold ourselves as we like.
Yes, Dr. Joe's great. I like Marissa Peer is great too for like the whole hypnosis thing, self-hypnosis, healing. And this is in practice. I'm staying with my parents to help them out. They're aged. Yeah. My dad has Huntington's disease, which is a neurological disease. If anybody should be going off the rails, it should be him. He's 83 years old, and they say grace every morning and every meal. And grace is self-hypnosis. That is what that is. Saying grace is gratitude. And his grace is not rote. So he doesn't say the same thing over and over again. He says what he is actually grateful for. And, thank you for the hands that prepared this meal. And whatever your spiritual practice is, a practice is a practice is a practice. So it's powerful, and it's helped him to stay well at 83, still living at home with a very serious neurological disease. So it's amazing, right? It's incredible.
Really beautiful.
Yeah,
it has to do with understanding the relationship of spirit to language. At the beginning, 𝑛 logos is the ancient Greek of in the beginning was the word. I should know it in Hebrew, but nonetheless, Greek
for the next episode.
Nothing. But if we come to understand the sacred nature of that simple phrase, the beginning of the Bible, we can see that our language actually makes flesh, as it said. It materializes. So it happens through our neural fibers, our network.
Yeah.
So it's like the stepping point into the 3D world. So anyway, that's why it literally takes place in your father's body. That sense of grace and gratitude, it manifests. And it may not be enough to correct a particular disease, but you can be sure that it's buffering and neutralizing.
Yes. Yes. And who couldn't use that? That's what the idea about the better human and the better world is, right? Yes, absolutely. Yes, absolutely.
So, this has a lot to do with your first question, Leah, like, what does a better world look like to me? I began describing of wanting us to get out of a militarized war headset. In fact, I just wrote an article about this called "Is COVID the New Afghanistan?" As we are pulling out of Afghanistan after 20 years of profound pain, suffering, murder, and loss. And what was gained. And I think that we could look at any war in the same way. It doesn't work. And it's so irrational. And you have to give people the benefit of the doubt to be able to come to a table, have a latte, and talk and be funny with each other and amuse each other. And I'm not kidding, actually, I'm serious. And maybe sing together. People from different nations singing their favorite song. And then you sit down and say, now look, how can we work this out? Let's be adult human beings. And I don't care if people consider that far-fetched and far-flung. I truly believe that peace can be brokered and happiness can be brokered, and all of the things that we need to sharing food and shelter and medicine and education as a world. And so if you ask me, what does a better world look like to me? That's what a better world looks like, of a shift in consciousness so that we see that we really are creative and creators, and we do not have to believe in what's been dished out to us and people accept by default. It's really stepping up to the plate, if you will, into action, being proactive about the kind of world and planet we want. So I'm involved in embedding those thoughts and embedding those values and embedding those actions, if you will, into the larger global mindset.
Beautiful. So everyone who's done anything like that, give yourself a pat on the back right now. If you've been part of, the peace, that's right. Give yourself a pat on the back, both hands, because you probably deserve it. And it's a good little stretch to take care of yourself energetically.
True enough.
So tell me some success stories. You've been doing this a long time. Have there been success stories where people have gone, we were living in this kind of a way, and now we've improved our condition. We become more peaceful. We become more harmonious.
I would say that there is an overall, there's on a personal level, I do see what I would call an awakening. I'm a little impatient sometimes, so it's been really slow from my point of view when I think of where I began and when I began, kind of seeing from a larger perspective. So it's sort of been like to the world, hurry up, come on, you can do this, go for it. And so from that point of view, I've been frustrated, very honestly. And on the other hand, when I take again a larger view and I say, look, you have to realize that human beings have been on this planet for tens of thousands of years, and we came from another type of species, and we're just gaining consciousness, and it's like a bear coming out of hibernation. And the propaganda that we've all been fed from birth is rather severe and significant, and really quite clever and elegant. So if you think about overcoming and becoming conscious and objective toward all that we've been taught, that is a real inner work, Leah, and one cannot expect that to happen overnight. Among any of us, even I, who, let's say, may have become more conscious earlier in my life, oh my God, there are blind spots still everywhere. Yeah. Certain things that are just difficult. So
every day, right?
Has there been an improvement? I would say there is. And there's this interesting paradox that, in a sense, as things get more difficult, as crisis increases, so does, as the ancient Chinese ideogram suggests, opportunity rises. There's this, I imagine that it could be described in quantum physics, what that relationship is. As the world on one hand looks like, and I say it that way, it's getting darker, the opportunity for consciousness commensurately, if not geometrically, increases. That's an interesting relationship.
Yes, absolutely. It's an interesting opportunity, definitely.
Yeah.
As my grandmother would say, you're making, it's time for you to either pee or get off the pot.
Yes.
There's some eloquence, but seriously, it's like this, when you are called this whole virtue and your values,
right.
your beliefs, virtues, and values, when they're called to task, you need to make a decision about what path you're going to follow. And it's moment to moment. It's this internal conversation that's happening. Should I do this? Should I do that? Whether that comes from how the mood that you wake up into in the morning, to the food that you put in your mouth, to the way that you greet your neighbor, the way that you carry yourself, the way that you care for yourself.
That's right.
And so maybe part of the problem has really been that we've been told not to care for ourselves too much. And so that everyone's got this, their opinion is more important than my own.
Yes.
So what are some other
very important?
Yeah.
You bring up, I think, one of the central nodes in what I teach people, which has to do, to whom do you attribute authority and why? And to really scrutinize that question, so one does not also give away one's power, and one can conserve it for oneself and not self-neglect, like you were kind of saying, on, let's say, a physical or an emotional level, but care for oneself. It's interesting, in Buddhist thought, if I may say, there's this idea of the bodhisattva. The idea of the bodhisattva is to work for the liberation of all sentient beings. Well, it looks like a very altruistic thing, and God knows it is. However, one of those beings is moi.
Is little old you.
Little old me. And if I neglect myself in that process, ain't going to be very successful. So, you know, when you fly in an airplane, one of the first things the stewardess says is, put the air mask on yourself first, then on your child.
Yeah.
I.e., if you don't have oxygen, baby, flowing, you're not going to be any help to anybody else.
Right.
It's a very interesting analogy, again,
Yeah.
for us to live by, if you will.
Yeah, important. I want to encourage everyone to get out your pen and paper if you haven't done so, because I encourage people to do that every episode. And again, this is part of learning, and the consciousness rising is writing things down. So when you're having a noticing about something, the embodiment of that thing is to go, okay, I need to write that down. So what was important out of what Mitchell just said or what Leaha just said that actually resonated with me? And how do I dig into that a little bit deeper, as opposed to it just kind of flowing over your ears and not getting any further in? Because mastering your life, which is what this show is about, a better world, which is what Mitchell is doing, is really, and the people who are listening are all people who desire that. No one's going to be listening to this podcast that wants to fix their car like this. Right. So you're already 3/4 of the way there, people, maybe 90%, right? So it's just going, the fine tuning though really is in this, the consciousness rising. Grab a pen, grab your favorite pen, grab something you relish. Your hands are where you hold love. So if what you're holding there all the time is your phone, you know, or the or a spoonful of cookie batter, just saying, 15 minutes before the podcast, you might have caught me. No, I'm kidding. But, you know, like if that's what you're holding in your hand, versus your pen, and you're becoming conscious about, what do I really think? What are my core beliefs? What are the things who has authority over me? Do I even notice where it's coming from? Is it somebody in my own home? Is it an idea that I had as a kid that I should have outgrown? Is it somebody I was told has authority over me, but really is kind of a fictional character? I love this one. Just wait till your dad gets home. Dad, the fictional character. It's like, where was that guy? Just right. But in the meantime, it's like, you spin your wheels and you don't do anything, and you're worried, and everyone's in stress. Versus what kind of life are you really trying to build for yourself? What kind of mind do you want? What kind of heart do you want? What kind of body do you want? And then, the relationships with other people, things that you'd like to ingest visually, you become more attuned to what you can tolerate, and what you don't want to tolerate. So I think then you get sensitive to it. So when you see things that aren't right in the world, you recognize them earlier, right? You recognize the injustice of things, yes, whether that's for somebody else or for yourself. So that whole self-reflection bit. What happened that you started that so early, Mitchell? Was there something specific that happened that you started studying the Eastern stuff?
Fun question. I was born Jewish, okay, and I had no real relationship with Judaism at all. I considered it really rather boring and very uninteresting. And as the famous Jewish comedian Jackie Mason was said to have been, was too Jewish. I don't like it. I felt that about Judaism.
Right.
What I loved about it was its wisdom. Right. I loved the sensibility. I loved the intelligence. I loved the humor. I really enjoy the culture, and I adore Hebrew and I adore Yiddish. Those are amazing languages. And of course, there's a whole, mystical thread of the Kabbalah, which really comes from Egypt, that courses through Judaism. So there's a lot good that I only discovered parts of later on in life. But in growing up, I had zero interest. And thankfully, my parents did not enforce it. So I never got bar mitzvahed as a 13-year-old. But later in Israel at the Wailing Wall, in fact, I did when I was 35. Oh. And I said, don't worry, the circumcision took place. You don't have to do that. Not doing that at 35. But anyway,
Check.
just
Check.
having some fun here. But all right, check, exactly. But so I had come later on in life to appreciate some of the deeper essence of it. But as a youngster is my teenage years, Leah, I had the opportunity to study yoga. I told you at a
Yes.
convent in Westport, Connecticut, that
Yes.
was donated to the town. So I was sort of interfaith from the beginning. And today I teach at an interfaith seminary, actually, in New York City, and I'm on their advisory board. So it stands to reason. But I found myself attracted to the East. And in fact, when someone did my astrology chart, it actually showed that I love things that are exotic. And I just naturally gravitated toward the exotic. So I loved Indian culture, the teaching of the Vedas, yoga, Vastu, the form of feng shui. That was the origin of feng shui, actually. Indian dance. Later on, I found myself married to Indian women. I mean, so it went on and on.
Yes.
Then the Chinese came, Lao-Tzu. And I had my first, what I would call, spiritual experience, reading the 𝙑𝙞𝙩𝙩𝙡𝙬. I mean, I didn't even know what spirituality meant when I was 14, until I had a direct experience through the ancient Chinese wisdom. Later on, it became Tibet and Tibetan Buddhist practice. So I don't know, I can't explain. Later, I found myself interested also in Western wisdom traditions. So it just kind of went that way.
Yeah, love it. I love it. I think when we first met that I'd said, it's nice that I'm not the only one that hasn't had a straight path. So I'm sure lots of people can relate. It's just like, wow, it's like I was looking over here and I was looking over there. We have a great ancient Babylonian astrologer that we work with at Master Your Life. Her name is 𝑸𝒖𝒂𝒃𝒍𝒆 𝑸𝒖𝒂𝒃𝒍𝒆, but just fantastic gal, and she does wonderful work, and she's a very divine, spiritual, lovely woman. You get these profound insights about yourself once you understand that part of life. That's a map in and of itself to explore.
Really true.
Really true.
Yeah.
And so some of this hidden knowledge of our own makeup can be discovered through these other tools that aren't just talk therapy. They aren't just, going and hanging out with your Aunt Martha, who maybe never figured out her life, or she's still working on things, So this whole life mastery thing is looking for experts, looking for mentors. But really, ultimately, I think it is figuring out that you are your own expert. You're your own best friend, you're your own best wisdom, and that's the thing that's been.
I like that.
Yeah, love. Yes, that can be refined.
There's a lot of truth and wisdom in that, Leah. I really do. At the end of the day, I mean, we need to have deep, loving relationships with as many people as we can, or the ones that we choose go deep and intimate and close and trusting. At the end of the day, we have to take care of ourselves. And so having an emotionally rich relationship with yourself, if you will, is really the basis of having a good relationship with others. And that's part of what I kind of teach my clients when I do work with them, both in counseling, in couples, and stress management. At the end of the day, you have to be your own, as you put it beautifully, your own best friend. Take care of yourself, sacrifice for sure. And that means, if you go back to the Latin, sacro and ficao means to make sacred. That's literally what it means. It's not this other idea we have of giving up, although it may involve giving something up. That's okay, but it's to make something sacred.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And because it does reflect what the war that we put up with in the world is reflective of the wars that we put up within ourselves.
Beautiful.
So once we kind of recognize this warfare, once it ends internally, because we're living in congruence with ourself and in our highest vibrational authority, and that still evolves day to day, moment to moment. As
Truly.
I laugh about when I interviewed Marissa Peer, she goes, she still has stuff on her arm like I am enough. Like people post that all over the place, I am enough, because we do still need these reminders. The indoctrination's been so fierce.
Yes.
That we're never, ever quite done. But when we wake up in the morning and we go, we're at peace internally with ourselves, there's no warring, there's no internal hate, then that doesn't reflect out into the world. And so why your work is so important, again, Mitchell, it is this whole reaching lots of people for them to think about, how do I become more loving of myself? And then how do I spread that through my resources? So whether that is your own spirit, going out in the world and being smiling and loving to other people just in how you hold yourself, or you bring them a bowl of chili, because they've been by themselves or whatever's been going on for them, or you help them across the street, whatever it is, where you're approaching other people with a sense of community. And a better world isn't just a better me, better things for me, things better for me. I am, number one, and that it's this idea of the expanded self. So do you want, just speak into that a bit?
Yeah,
more?
absolutely. So beautifully put. First of all, what comes to mind as I heard you last speak just now is that on the path of increasing consciousness is the experience of oneness. Just, it's sort of the central hub of it all.
It is.
And when one has that dawning realization, as I know you have, which is what motivates us to do the things that you and I do, Leaha.
Yes.
And it's serving other is also the same as serving self, because the distinction isn't as obvious. It's just not clear cut. Yeah. There's one being, one organism, if you will. So to help other is the same. Think of how good you feel when you do something for somebody else. That feeling is completely priceless. And we also, in light of everything else that you were saying just now and our dialogue here, I was thinking about the impact each of us has on other people that we do not know of. Now, living in New York, I pass people on the street that are asking for money and this and that all the time, actually. And because of the whole COVID thing, it's gotten worse, frankly. And it's not pretty and it's not pleasant, but it's true and it's real. And so I have found, and I have been told, that as much as somebody wants, 50 cents or $1, or sometimes I walk around with bananas,
right,
a little potassium,
that's
and
right.
I give them out. They are looking for human contact.
Yes.
And to look at somebody who is on the street feeling dejected, can you imagine how you would feel about yourself sitting on the street with a cup up, So to make human contact with that person in the eye, a smile, a loving look, a moment of real humanitarian exchange is priceless. And that person, you are impacting in a way that you can never have any idea.
And they are impacting you the same.
And they're impacting you the same.
Yeah, or even maybe more so. It's funny, Mitchell, that years ago, I would go to I live in a city now as well. And I would go to the local coffee shop, a chain coffee shop on my way to work. And there was always somebody sitting outside that didn't have stuff. So it could be one person, two people, five people. And I would have people in my life say, don't give them anything because obviously they're derelicts and da-da-da. And I worked in mental health at that time. I'm like, you have no idea what anyone else's story is, but for the grace of whatever has gone on in my life, I am on the side that has the wallet at this moment. So I would go in and get coffee. But sometimes if it was just one person standing there, I would say, or sitting there, I'd say, why don't you come in and have a coffee with me? I would go early in the morning so that they could come in with me. And I just remember people looking at me, them looking at me like I'd lost my mind. the other people in the coffee shop looking at me like I'd lost my mind, but I hadn't. I think we've lost our collective minds when we think that that isn't something we should contemplate. Well, aren't they dangerous? Aren't they, like, I would get all of this argument and I go, no, you don't know any of that. You've made up an entire story about what this person has had gone on in their life. And we've seen enough economic woe, in people's lives that we know decimation of marriages, addictions to medication, to pharmacological stuff that's been prescribed by doctors. We know that it isn't just people that are evil, bad, and awful that are sitting outside the coffee shops looking for their next meal. But the conversation with people then is they felt honored. And I felt like I was like an actual human being. It wasn't something glossy. It was just connecting human to human. And I did that very frequently because then it became my practice. Right. So that was amazing.
That is awesome. That is a beautiful story, Leaha. And I really honor you for having taken that extra step to do those actions. And I mean, creating a better world. Wow. Maybe it's not that hard. Maybe it's a $1.50 coffee,
right?
And sitting with somebody and saying, why don't you get your life together, babe?
Right. Totally.
Let's talk.
How can I help you? How can I help you get, so it'd be like, because I knew resources around the area. So it'd be like a lot of times people get so low down, they can't even think about where to go for the next thing. So I would know where stuff was. I would know people who were hiring.
You're a resource.
Yeah. So it's like then, and share the resources of what you've got. And if you've got nothing, you still have your smile. You still have your good energy.
Totally.
Yeah, you still have.
There's an energy transmission that happens. There is an expression of love through that gesture of sitting them down and having a cup of coffee or putting something in the cup. But I'm looking at the contact, which you are clearly too. The eye contact, they say the eyes are the seat of the soul, so when you look at somebody in the eyes, it's this level of depth that is present.
Yes, beautifully put. Double and of light. Because even in the people who are the most downtrodden, if you look at them and see them for the divine being that they are, that is reflected in you. And they see it. It's better than any mirror in the world because they're seeing it come from another human being. And that is, so from yourself is awesome. And from other human beings, having this positive regard for one another and what their gifts were in the world. Because again, you don't have any idea what they were doing prior. Gosh, you know what? We're out of time almost. So I better so tell us what is that you're working on right now, Mitch, and how people get in touch.
World is a nonprofit that is sort of an umbrella organization for the work I do in counseling, in energy medicine, which we didn't even really touch on much, but and on the individual and couples counseling work that I do. It's also the umbrella for the media work, the radio, TV, podcast, as we say these days, etc., like that. I've made a bunch of PBS specials with others who were documentarians, etc., over the years. I would love to go into that direction at some point. It's also an umbrella for different entrepreneurial activities having to do with supporting health and wellness and getting high quality organic products out into the marketplace to improve people's health and well-being. It's also a place where I work on other entrepreneurial activities. I see business as a driver of change, as a vehicle for transformation. I say often, Leaha, that it has been business that has driven us to the verge of ecosystemic destruction. And it's going to be exactly business with consciousness and compassion that brings us back.
Wonderful. And so for those of you who would like to connect with Mitchell, you can watch this interview on masteryourlife.ca. You can get in contact with him through the show notes that will be beneath the episode. You can reach out by email, masteryourlife.ca, and just send me a note if you want to connect with Mitchell. And that would be absolutely divine. Thanks again for being such a great guest.
Oh, my pleasure, Leah. Thanks so much for having me. I had so much fun and look forward to doing it again. God knows, for sure.
Lovely, lovely. Everyone, love yourselves, love each other, mind your minds. That's all for us. Bye for now.
Thank you for being a part of our program today. Master Your Life is a presentation of Leaha Mattinson Enterprises, Inc. Join us next time on Master Your Life, helping you to discover the very best of you.